Welcome to Andre's Insight, where clarity meets curiosity. Today, we're plunging into something that, well, it shapes our every interaction or every decision:
Mm.
personality. You've given us a fascinating collection of ideas exploring how we try to understand and categorize the wonderfully unique ways people think, feel, and act.
It's quite a journey, isn't it?
Definitely. So our mission today is to really dig into these different perspectives, from ancient ideas about what makes us tick to the scientific models of today.
Right.
We want to see what these insights can offer you in understanding not just yourself, but also the people around you.
Makes sense.
We'll be looking at the various lenses through which personality has been viewed and some of the tools used to try and measure it. And we won't shy away from discussing some of the debates and questions that still exist.
Absolutely. It's a journey through centuries of trying to decode human nature. Shall we start right at the beginning with some of the earliest attempts?
Yeah, let's do that. Where do we begin? Ancient Greece.
Exactly. Think back to Hippocrates and his theory of the four humors. Yellow bile, black bile, blood, and phlegm.
Ah, the humors. Sounds a bit strange now, maybe.
Well, yeah, but the idea was that the balance of these fluids within us determined our temperament.
A fluid forecast for your feelings.
Yeah.
So, too much yellow bile meant you were choleric, fiery, quick-tempered.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And black bile made you melancholic, thoughtful, maybe a bit downcast.
Okay. And blood.
Blood led to a sanguine personality, cheerful, optimistic, full of life.
Right. And the last one, phlegm.
Too much phlegm resulted in a phlegmatic nature, calm, steady, maybe a bit unemotional. It's quite a vivid picture they painted.
It really is. And this idea stuck around for a while, didn't it?
For centuries, others built on it, like Galen. Several hundred years later, he further developed these temperaments.
And even much later.
Oh, yes. Even as late as the 18th and 19th centuries, thinkers like Immanuel Kant and Wilhelm Wundt were still engaging with it. Kant mostly agreed with the four basic types. But Wundt offered a slightly different angle. He suggested personality could be better understood by looking at where someone fell on two scales: emotional versus non-emotional, and changeable versus unchangeable.
Ah, so moving from strict boxes to more like dimensions, even back then, that's pretty interesting.
That shows the evolution of thinking.
But I also remember reading about some, well, let's just say less conventional early ideas. Something about reading bumps on people's heads.
Ah, you're thinking of phrenology.
Yeah.
That came about in the early 19th century with Franz Gall.
Phrenology, right. What was the core idea there?
The central idea was that specific brain areas were responsible for certain personality traits, and the size and shape of your skull reflected how developed these areas were.
So a big bump here meant you were really generous or something.
Something like that, yeah. A prominent bump in a certain region supposedly meant a strong version of the associated trait.
And this turned out to be.
Definitely shown to be incorrect. Pseudoscience, really. But, it still represents an early attempt to find a physical basis for personality differences, trying to map it somehow.
Right, looking for a biological link, even if the method was flawed. More about the outside than the inside, it seems.
Pretty much.
So, from bodily fluids and head bumps, we moved on to other ways of grouping people. We still hear about Jung's idea of introverts and extroverts all the time.
Absolutely. Carl Jung, early 20th century, he proposed that people tend to direct their mental energy either primarily inward, towards their own thoughts and feelings, that's introversion,
Okay.
or outward, towards the external world and other people, extroversion. It's about where you get your energy, fundamentally.
That distinction feels very familiar. Were there other typologies around that time?
Yes, around the same time, Edward Spranger offered another perspective based on core values. He identified 6 basic types of men based on what they fundamentally valued most.
6 types based on values?
Yeah.
What were they?
There was the theoretical type, driven by seeking knowledge. The economic type, focused on usefulness, practicality.
Got it.
The aesthetic type, valuing beauty and harmony. The social type, motivated by helping others. The political type, interested in power and influence. And finally, the religious type, guided by spirituality and a search for meaning.
Wow, 6 very different lenses for how people might prioritize their lives. It really gives you a lot to think about when you're trying to understand someone's motivations, doesn't it?
It does. It shifts the focus to what drives people.
And then there was another idea linking personality to body types, Sheldon's somatotypes.
Yes, William Sheldon, mid-20th century, he suggested a connection between 3 basic body builds, what he called endomorphy, softer, rounder.
Right.
Mesomorphy, more muscular, athletic.
Uh-huh.
And ectomorphy,
Mm.
lean, tall. And he linked these to corresponding temperament types.
So body shape equals personality type. What were the temperaments?
For endomorphs, it was viscertonia relaxed, sociable, enjoys comfort. For mesomorphs, somatotonia active, assertive, adventurous. And for ectomorphs, cerebrotonia restrained, inhibited, intellectual.
Interesting. Again, that focus on our physical form as being key.
Exactly. The constitutional structure was seen as foundational.
Okay, so we've seen all these attempts to put people into distinct categories, these types. But then psychology started to shift toward the idea of traits, right? These more consistent characteristics we all have to some degree.
Precisely. Trait theories moved away from those rigid typologies. They focused instead on identifying and measuring these broader, more continuous dimensions of personality that tend to influence our behavior across different situations.
So not just, are you friendly, but how friendly are you generally? That kind of thing.
Exactly, like friendliness or assertiveness or how organized someone tends to be, consistent patterns.
And one of the early pioneers here was Eysenck, with his two main dimensions.
That's right. Hans Eysenck. He proposed a model centered around two major personality dimensions. First, neuroticism, which reflects emotional instability versus stability.
Okay, emotional stability.
And second, extroversion-introversion, similar to Jung's idea, but Eysenck emphasized the underlying biological mechanisms. He talked about inhibition and excitation in the brain.
Ah, trying to find that biological basis again. Did he connect these to anything else?
He did. He even proposed links between where someone fell on these dimensions and their proneness to certain psychological issues. For instance, he suggested introverts might be more susceptible to phobias, while extroverts might be more prone to things like conversion disorders.
Fascinating. Trying to link personality patterns to potential vulnerabilities. Okay, let's jump ahead a bit to some more modern approaches. One that's incredibly popular, you see it everywhere, especially in workplaces, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI.
The MBTI, yes, it's incredibly widespread. It categorizes people into 16 distinct personality types.
16 types. How does it do that?
It uses 4 pairs of preferences, 4 dichotomies. Introversion versus extroversion.
Like woo.
Right. Then sensing versus intuition, how you take in information. Thinking versus feeling, how you make decisions. And judging versus perceiving, how you prefer to live your outer life, more structured or more flexible.
I see. And companies use this a lot.
Oh, definitely. It's frequently used in organizations for recruitment, team building, personal development, the whole package. The idea is that understanding these preferences can lead to better communication, maybe increased job satisfaction, improved team performance.
And it's based on Jung's theory, you said, trying to find your true type.
That's the foundational theory, yes.
Mhm.
It aims to pinpoint your preference on each of those 4 scales.
But I feel like there's often a but with the MBTI. I've heard criticisms.
There are definitely criticisms. Despite its huge popularity, the MBTI has faced a fair amount of scrutiny about its scientific validity and reliability.
Okay, like what specifically? Reliability, does that mean it's not consistent?
That's one concern, yes. Because it forces you into one category or the other. On each scale, it's a forced choice. Even if you feel quite close to the middle, you get assigned a type.
Ah, so no room for nuance there.
Not really in the final type. And related to that, people can sometimes get different results if they take the test again, even a short time later. Test reliability can be an issue for some scales.
Okay, so maybe not perfectly stable. What about validity? Does it actually measure personality well or predict job success?
That's the other major area of criticism. Research hasn't consistently shown strong links between someone's MBTI type and their actual job performance or success in particular careers.
So using it for hiring might be problematic.
Some experts argue strongly against that, yes. Critics also point out that the underlying Jungian theory isn't strongly supported by modern empirical evidence, and that these rigid categories don't really capture the continuous spectrum of personality traits that most research now supports. Personality exists more on a continuum.
Right, most people aren't purely one thing or the other.
Exactly. And the MBTI tells you about your preference, the direction you lean, but not the strength of that preference or your actual skill or aptitude in that area.
Okay, so it's about your inclination, not how good you are at it or how strongly you feel that way. That's a key distinction.
It is.
But despite all these criticisms, lots of people find it really helpful, right, for self-understanding.
Absolutely. Many people genuinely find the MBTI to be a valuable tool for self-reflection. It can help them understand their own interaction styles, why they click with some people and not others, and appreciate differences in how others approach things.
So it can be a good starting point for conversation and self-awareness.
It can be. The organization behind the MBTI does cite research supporting its reliability and validity, and for many, it provides a useful, accessible framework for thinking about personality differences and fostering better interpersonal understanding. It has its place, perhaps more in personal development than strict scientific measurement.
Okay, so a popular tool, potentially useful for self-growth, but we need to be aware of its scientific limitations. Good to know. Now let's move on to another major framework in modern personality psychology, the Big Five.
The Big Five. Yes, this is often seen as the leading scientifically validated model right now. It's sometimes called the five-factor model, or you might hear the acronym OCEAN.
Ocean. Okay, what does that stand for?
It stands for the five broad dimensions: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
And this came from research, not just theory.
Exactly. It's more empirically derived. It emerged from decades of research, particularly looking at the words people use to describe personality characteristics. Researchers found that these descriptive words tend to cluster together statistically into these five broad factors.
Interesting. So based on language and how we describe each other, let's unpack ocean. What exactly is openness?
Openness, or sometimes called openness to experience, involves traits like imagination, curiosity, intellectual engagement, aesthetic sensitivity, and a willingness to embrace novelty and unconventional ideas.
So someone high in openness is adventurous, curious, likes new things.
Generally, yes, and people who score lower in openness tend to be more conventional, down to earth, and perhaps less comfortable with abstract concepts or ambiguity.
Got it. Okay, next is C, conscientiousness. That sounds like being organized, responsible.
Precisely. Conscientiousness involves being self-disciplined, careful, organized, responsible, dependable, and striving for achievement. It's about being planful and having good impulse control.
Sounds like a very positive trait. Any downsides?
Well, very high conscientiousness can sometimes manifest as excessive perfectionism or workaholism.
Yeah.
But generally, it's linked to positive outcomes. It's been connected to better quality relationships within teams
Oh, interesting.
and even being perceived as a more transformational leader. Interestingly, that feeling of guilt some people get, it can actually motivate highly conscientious people to get tasks done.
Guilt as a productivity tool.
In a way, and it consistently shows up as a predictor of success in things like exams, likely because these individuals are less prone to procrastinating or delaying study.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, E is extroversion. We've touched on this one before.
Yes, in the Big Five context, extroversion is characterized by sociability, assertiveness, positive emotionality, and a tendency to draw energy from interacting with others and the external world.
And the opposite end is introversion, seeking energy from solitude.
Essentially, yes. Lower extroversion means being more reserved, perhaps quieter, and gaining energy more from solitary activities.
Okay. A is agreeableness. Sounds straightforward, getting along with others.
Exactly. Agreeableness includes traits like being cooperative, trusting, empathetic, helpful, considerate, and compassionate. It reflects a general concern for social harmony.
And low agreeableness, more critical maybe.
Could be perceived that way. Someone lower in agreeableness might be more suspicious, less cooperative, perhaps more argumentative or less concerned about others' feelings or problems. Like conscientiousness, higher agreeableness is also associated with better team relationships.
Right. And finally, N, neuroticism. We heard about this from iSync too. Is it the same idea?
Pretty much the same core concept. Neuroticism refers to the tendency to experience negative emotions like anxiety, worry, sadness, anger, and irritability. It's often discussed as the opposite of emotional stability.
So people high in neuroticism feel negative emotions more often or more intensely?
Yes, generally. They tend to have a lower threshold for stress, might interpret ordinary situations as more threatening, and can experience negative feelings more intensely and for longer periods. They might also tend towards pessimism, particularly about work, and could potentially be more risk-averse. Although, interestingly, it can sometimes be linked to impulsivity as well, which seems contradictory, but might relate to difficulty managing strong emotions.
Are there any upsides to neuroticism?
Potentially. Some argue that this heightened sensitivity can lead to greater self-awareness or vigilance. Being very aware of potential threats could, in some situations, lead to more careful planning or execution. Hypervigilance isn't always bad.
Interesting. So even traits we might label negative can have complex effects. Now, a big question. Do these big five traits stay pretty consistent throughout our lives? Or do we change?
That's a great question. Research suggests there's a good degree of stability in these traits once we reach adulthood. Your rank order compared to others tends to stay relatively similar.
So if you're more extroverted than your friends at 30, you probably still will be at 50.
Generally, yes. However, there's also evidence for systematic changes across the lifespan, what's often called the maturation effect.
Maturation effect. What does that mean?
On average, as people age, they tend to become somewhat more agreeable and conscientious and slightly less extroverted, neurotic, and open to experience.
So we tend to mellow out, become more responsible, and maybe a bit less novelty-seeking as we get older, on average.
That seems to be the general trend, yes. But it's crucial to remember these are average trends. Individual patterns of change can vary quite a lot based on life experiences and other factors.
Right, averages don't tell the whole story for any one person. Are there other interesting patterns, like differences between men and women?
Yes, studies across many different cultures have found some consistent, though usually small, gender differences on average. Women often tend to report slightly higher levels of neuroticism, agreeableness, and also some facets of extroversion, like warmth, and openness, like feelings.
And men?
Men, on average, tend to report slightly higher levels of assertiveness, an aspect of extroversion, and openness related to ideas. But again, these are averages with lots of overlap between men and women.
Okay. And you mentioned conscientiousness predicting exam success. Does it relate to academic motivation generally?
Yes, conscientiousness is consistently linked to better academic performance and higher levels of motivation and learning across various levels of education.
Makes sense. What about more societal things like political views? Is there any connection there?
There is some research suggesting links, yeah. Individuals scoring higher in conscientiousness tend, on average, to lean towards more conservative or right-wing political ideologies.
Okay. And openness.
Higher openness tends to correlate, again on average, with more liberal or left-leaning ideologies.
Interesting. But these are just tendencies, right? Not deterministic.
Absolutely. It's important to emphasize that these correlations are generally small to moderate. Personality is only one factor among many influencing political identification. We should be very careful not to overstate these links.
Got it. So the Big Five seems pretty robust, widely researched. But like any model, it probably has its critics or limitations too.
Oh, for sure. No model is perfect. One significant criticism is its heavy reliance on self-report questionnaires. People might not see themselves accurately, or they might answer in socially desirable ways.
The faking good problem.
Exactly. Or just lack of self-insight. Some researchers also argue that the 5 factors themselves might be partly an artifact of our language, the words we happen to have to describe people. Maybe language emphasizes social harmony, agreeableness, and danger signals, neuroticism, disproportionately.
So the factors might reflect our linguistic biases.
That's one argument. There's also some cross-cultural research suggesting that agreeableness and openness might not be as clearly defined or universally applicable in all populations. And some find labels like neuroticism a bit, well, loaded or not fully capturing the nuances.
Any proposed alternative?
There are ongoing debates. Some researchers have proposed a 6-factor model, often called Hexaco.
Hexaco, what's the H?
The H stands for honesty, humility, which includes traits like sincerity, fairness, greed avoidance, and modesty. Proponents argue this adds important predictive power beyond the Big Five.
Okay, so even the Big Five is still evolving and being debated. That's good to know. Now, we've talked about these traits as general descriptions. How do they actually, play out when we have to make decisions?
That's a really practical connection. Our personality traits, particularly within the Big Five framework, can definitely influence our decision-making styles.
How so? Take neuroticism, for example.
Well, someone scoring high in neuroticism might be more likely to focus on potential negative outcomes, anticipate threats, and react more strongly to perceived risks. This could lead them to be more cautious, maybe more risk-averse in their choices.
That makes sense. Seeing the potential downsides everywhere would make you hesitant. What about someone high in conscientiousness?
They might approach decisions very systematically. They'll likely want to gather all the information, weigh the pros and cons carefully, follow a process. Very thorough.
But could that backfire?
It can. Sometimes this thoroughness can lead to analysis paralysis, where they get so bogged down in gathering information and analyzing options that they struggle to actually make the final choice.
Right, overthinking it. And extroversion, how does that influence decisions?
Extroverts tend to be more sensitive to rewards and positive stimuli. They seek out excitement and novelty. This might make them more inclined towards seeking pleasurable prompts, maybe taking more risks or making quicker, more impulsive decisions, especially if there's a potential payoff.
Okay, so our core tendencies really shape how we approach choices. Does this apply in specific real-world areas, like money or careers?
Absolutely. Research has looked into this. For instance, in finance, some studies suggest that individuals high in neuroticism or low in openness might be less likely to invest in equities, in stocks.
Why would that be?
Well, for high neuroticism, it could be due to a generally more pessimistic outlook on the market or higher sensitivity to potential losses. For low openness, it might relate to a discomfort with the uncertainty or complexity involved in investing.
Interesting. And career choices.
There's research there too. For example, individuals with what's called a proactive personality, those who tend to take initiative, seek out opportunities, and act to influence their environment, have been shown to have greater confidence in making career decisions, higher self-efficacy.
So being proactive helps you feel more capable of navigating career choices.
It seems so. And one study even looked at medical students and found links between personality and decision-making styles. Higher conscientiousness, for instance, was associated with a less spontaneous, more deliberate decision-making approach.
So our personalities aren't just these abstract concepts. They have real, tangible effects on the choices we make every day.
Exactly.
And it's not just about individual decisions, is it? Our personalities must fundamentally shape how we interact with other people, how we form relationships.
Oh, absolutely. Our typical ways of acting, thinking, feeling, wanting really forms the bedrock of our social interactions.
How does that work in, say, a close relationship?
Think about something fundamental like trust in a romantic couple. Research shows it's influenced by multiple personality-related factors. There's your own general tendency to trust people, an aspect of agreeableness, perhaps. That's the actor effect.
Okay, my baseline trust level.
Then there's how trustworthy your partner tends to be based on their personality, the partner effect.
Right, their traits influence how I see them.
And then there's the unique dynamic, the chemistry or fit between your two specific personalities, the relationship effect, how your traits uniquely combine. All these shape the trust in that specific relationship.
Wow, it's like a complex equation based on both people's personalities and their interaction. Actor, partner, relationship effects. That makes sense.
It highlights how individual differences matter in dyads.
And does it work the other way, too? Can our relationships and social experiences actually change our personality over time?
Yes, it definitely seems to be a two-way street. Our social experiences can contribute to personality development or change.
Like how?
Well, for example, consistently feeling socially included, accepted, and valued by others can lead to increases in self-esteem over time.
That makes intuitive sense.
Conversely, experiencing chronic stress, perhaps from difficult relationships or social exclusion, can impact our emotional stability, potentially increasing neuroticism or making us more reactive to stress. Our stress reactivity itself can drive changes.
So, our interactions are constantly shaping us, subtly or not so subtly.
It seems so. Even things like accurately perceiving someone's personality when you first meet them, getting a good read on them, has been linked to liking them more later on, and even relationship longevity.
Really? So first impressions based on personality actually matter quite a bit.
They can, yes. It suggests that understanding and being understood on a personality level is important for connection.
It's this continuous feedback loop then. Our personalities shape our connections, and those connections in turn can subtly mold who we become. It's all incredibly interconnected.
It really is.
So after this really fascinating deep dive into all these different ways of understanding personality, from humors to the big five, what are some key takeaways for you, the listener?
Well, I think the first big takeaway is just acknowledging the complexity. Understanding personality is multifaceted, and there's no single right answer. We've seen ancient ideas, type theories, trait theories. Each offers a different lens, a potentially valuable perspective on human behavior.
So don't just dismiss one model entirely.
I think that's wise. Both frameworks that categorize us into types, like the MBTI, and those that describe us along continuous traits, like the Big Five, have their own strengths and limitations. Both can offer meaningful insights, even if the scientific backing differs. They help us think about behavior.
Okay, so here's where it gets really practical for you listening. Becoming more aware of your own personality tendencies Maybe using some of these models as a starting point for reflection can be a really powerful tool.
Absolutely. For self-understanding, it can help you recognize your natural strengths, identify potential blind spots or areas for growth, and give you a clearer picture of how you typically approach decisions or navigate relationships.
And understanding others too, presumably.
Definitely. And it's so important to maintain a balanced perspective here. Recognizing the inherent value in different personality styles, even those very different from your own, is key
Why is that so important?
because it fosters empathy, better communication, more effective collaboration. For example, we often think of leadership needing extroversion, right? But research shows introverted leaders can be incredibly effective, especially when leading proactive teams who bring their own ideas. Different styles bring different strengths.
That's a great point. Value the diversity of personalities. Okay, so what does this all mean for you? Hopefully, this deep dive into the world of personality has given you some intriguing nuggets, sparked some curiosity about what makes each of us unique.
Maybe take some time to reflect. Which of these frameworks or ideas resonated most with your own experiences? Did any of these theories illuminate aspects of your own personality, or maybe help you understand someone else a bit better?
And you could think about your own decision making. Are you generally cautious or more impulsive? Do you see how your typical emotional responses, maybe your level of neuroticism or extroversion, might play a role in the choices you make day to day?
And here's a final thought to maybe mull over. How might consciously using this deeper understanding of personality, both your own and others, enhance your interactions, your relationships, and just your general understanding of the complex human world around you as you move forward?